So this is the Monday, August 9th, 2021 meeting of the Planning and Development Committee. We have a quorum. I'm declaring the meeting, calling the meeting to order. So the first item is PM1, approval of minutes of the regular Planning and Development Committee meetings of June 14, June 28, and July 26. Would someone like to make a motion with respect to that?
I will make a motion to approve those minutes.
Thank you. Okay. Would you? Yes, please. And
Councilmember Kelly.
Here.
Councilmember Newsmill.
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn.
aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton. Aye. Councilmember Ravel.
Aye. All right. The minutes are approved. Next, we're going
Aye.
to move to. Thank you. Next, we're going to move to public comment. I'd like for us to. We're going to take all of public comment first, and then we'll move on to the particular issues. And we have several people who will be speaking on particular issues, and we'll call on them as their item comes up. So first, I have Sean Foster. Oh, and let's see. You have 2 minutes. Thank you.
Do you want to leave this on? Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Wait, is
So
that all right?
really all I'm looking for is clarification around the process. So without belaboring the point too much, we have an application in for an ADU that began before the moratorium discussion came up. It is an owner-occupied home. I won't, again, belabor the details, but the feedback from zoning while this is going on has been, don't say anything until legal says it's okay to say something. And meanwhile, I'm kind of hanging in the balance. So the greater clarification that you can give, particularly if non-owner occupied is outside of the scope of this discussion, would be super helpful. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to have Ms. Nyden, our Community Development Director, answer your question.
So the proposed moratorium is on is on non-owner occupied internal and attached accessory dwelling units. So anything outside of that, we've continued to permit and review. So if after this meeting, or if you want to send an email to staff, your application should go forward if it is outside of what is the moratorium. So again, the moratorium is on non-owner occupied properties or non-owner occupied detached, sorry, I'm saying this wrong, internal and attached ADUs that are non-owner occupied is where this moratorium is. So if you are owner occupied and you're doing an internal or attached ADU, we can continue to permit your project because that it does not fall under this moratorium.
Great. That's just not completely consistent with the direction we've heard recently. So appreciate the clarification.
All right, thank you. Who have we got next on the line?
Next up is Bill Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I'd be very brief. I'm a member of the board of directors of the church, and I'm the assistant treasurer. And I just wanted to say that landmarking our building would preclude one potential use of the property, which would be single-family homes. And it would also impose on the congregation an additional burden of maintaining the building up to a standard we cannot afford. And I appreciate your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dick Coe is next, then Mary McWilliams.
Hi, can you hear me?
There we go. Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Wonderful. Well, council members and city staff, good afternoon. My name is Dick Coe, and I'm a 7th Ward resident and a worker owner with the Evanston Development Cooperative. I'm speaking tonight to share my views on item P5 regarding a moratorium on non-owner occupied interior ADUs, and I respectfully ask the members of this committee to vote against introducing ordinance 75-021 on the basis of racial equity and good governance. As an engaged citizen, I like to take a see something, say something approach to these matters. In 2019, we saw that old language in our zoning code was excluding owners of 2 flats, predominantly in West Evanston, from detached ADU opportunities. We said something at the time, and City Council expanded detached ADUs beyond single-family residences. Along the way, there was an attempt to limit detached ADUs to be no taller than the primary residence. Using Cook County data, we realized that single-level ranch-style homes were again predominantly in West Evanston. We saw that would negatively affect West Evanston homeowners. So again, we said something, and City Council voted to not further restrict the creation of sensible housing options for our homeowners. These are 2 examples of why Evanston is a leader in ADU policy. Today, when I look at ordinance 75-021, I see 2 things. First, I see the need to address the ever-growing issue of absentee landlords in our community. Their presence has detrimental effects on Evanston neighborhoods, Evanston homeowners, and also for the young adult renters who are often being taken advantage of. As such, I fully support the new P&D subcommittee, as we will need to bring forth creative and actionable solutions to stop this behavior by out-of-town investors. Second, I see a proposed solution that's going to predominantly hurt the opportunity for low and moderate income homeowners to access financing to build ADUs. I also see a process that will add incredible burden to our city staff when it comes to compliance and enforcement. All of these concerns have been raised eloquently in the memo in today's packet. What I would like to add and emphasize is that national organizations such as the AARP, Enterprise Community Partners, and the Urban Land Institute have done extensive studies on the exact issue at hand here: occupancy requirements on ADUs. One quote from Enterprise Community Partners jumps out at me, and I quote, "Eliminating occupancy requirements is essential to allow for the use of ADU development as a strategy to build wealth for lower and moderate income homeowners and boost the supply and affordability of rental housing in single-family zoned areas." Evanston is a regional leader in ADU policy, and we are just getting started. It can take years for a homeowner to take an ADU project, like the gentleman before me, internal or detached, from concept to financing and to completion. It would be a shame to make things more difficult for our homeowners. I would like to see us keep moving forward as a community, not to take a step back. Knowing that ADU occupancy requirements disproportionately hurt lower and moderate income homeowners, I just don't see the proposed solution as a viable one, given our commitment to ending structural racism and achieving racial equity, a unanimous resolution adopted in June 2019. So I conclude by respectfully asking that we end the ADU occupancy discussion tonight so that we can devote our time and resources to fully address absentee landlords and the other pressing issues facing our city today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mary McWilliams?
I'm Mary McWilliams. I'm here to speak on the church.
Mary,
Evanston-
could I get you to move the mic closer to your mouth?
I will.
Yes,
There.
thank you.
Sorry. I'm short and the microphone is tall. Evanston once called itself the city of churches. One way to memorialize the significance of churches in Evanston's history is to designate them as Evanston Landmarks. In the 1970s and 80s, the Preservation Commission found 14 churches that met one or more criteria for designation. 11 churches were determined to exemplify an architectural style distinguished by rarity, overall quality of design, detail, or craftsmanship. In July, the Preservation Commission found that the Second Church of Christ Scientists also meets this criterion. 7 of the churches cited for architecture were designed by firms, not individual architects, according to the building permits. The firms were Talmadge and Watson for 4 churches, Burnham and Root, Holabird and Roach, and Atchison and Edbrook. When determining whether the churches in question qualified to be Evanston Landmarks, the Preservation Commission did not question whether Thomas Talmadge, who lived in Evanston, or Vernon Watson had designed the 4 churches listed on the building permits over the name Talmadge and Watson. The same is true of the other firms. Despite knowing only the firms' names, the Preservation Commission determined that the churches also met the criterion that says the churches were identified as the work of an architect whose work is significant in the history or development of the city. Here, too, the firm of Perkins, Wheeler, and Will meets this criterion. Whether the Second Church of Christ Scientist is cited as the work of Larry Perkins or of Perkins, Wheeler, and Will is irrelevant. Larry Perkins was the founder and a principal of the firm, and as such was responsible for the quality of all the designs produced by his firm. Finally, the initial list of Evanston landmarks compiled in the 1970s and 80s was never intended to be a definitive list of significant Evanston structures. The preservation ordinance encouraged the addition of other significant buildings as the commission becomes aware of them. Now, I have a list of the churches that are Evanston landmarks, which I'd like to give you to pass out.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Robert Shiverts.
Good evening, chamber members, and guests. Robert Shiverts, a member of Second Church of Christ Zionist, Evanston, 2715 Hurd Avenue. I'm going to start my video, forgive me. And I will be speaking a little bit faster than normal just to get the information in. I'm saying resolutely no for the landmarking of Second Church at 2715 Hurd Avenue. The landmarking of 2715 Hurd was advocated by only one member of the community against the express wishes of the rest of the community, which were to demolish the church to create single-family housing. And not only that, the owners of the church have never advocated for its landmarking. You have the unusual position of one person advocating for the landmarking of a building without the owners advocating for it. In addition, the petitioner, Mr. Nebel, waited 3 years to file the landmarking petition, though the church was on the market for at least 3 or 4 years prior to that. And during that time was set for demolition by DAPR committee in November 2020, with no objection by the city, in accord with plans to build a new childcare facility. Quite at odds and inconsistent with his future actions, Mr. Nebel made no recorded attempt to landmark the church when it first went on the market years ago, and even when it was set to be demolished. It is also quite noteworthy that Kate Sterling from the Historic Preservation Commission never raised any objections at the November 2020 meeting, but later switched his position without very clear explanation. One could conjecture, I'm not saying prove or cause, one could conjecture that the late timing of the landmarking petition by Nebel weaponized landmarking, not for the intrinsic value of sustaining worthy structures, which is the purpose of landmarking, but rather to stop development of a future structure disagreeable to the petitioner. In addition, this weaponizing of landmarking as a social policy to stop development without setting higher standards and the demand for more rigorous documentation for landmarking will lead to several deteriorating structures throughout Evanston due to the shrinking nature of most churches' memberships, who will often need to sell due to economic urgencies. Therefore, excessive abuse or use of landmarking as a way to block development may very well lead to the opposite goals it was intended to achieve. In other words, to deteriorating buildings. The Historical Preservation Commission gave our church the opportunity to present thoroughly researched objections, which were delivered in 2 sessions with the Preservation Commission. It would seem reasonable, just, and ethical that the commission would then be able to respond to at least some or all of the objections,
Mr.
but did
Schubert?
not in any way respond whatsoever, except with continued silence. The chair, surprisingly, finally simply stated, after the second set of objections were delivered after 2 meetings, that the decision had already been made that the church would be landmarked.
Mr. Shiverts, could you wrap up, please?
I'm done. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Elizabeth Drake, and then Wynn Graham.
Elizabeth Drake? Okay,
There, I think I'm unmuted.
there you go.
Good evening, and thank you for your time, and thank you for reviewing our situation. I'm Elizabeth Drake, the treasurer of the Second Church of Christ Scientist in Evanston. And I'm here as treasurer, but wanted to first mention that my background as an interior designer for 20 plus years on the North Shore does give me an appreciation of architectural history and its context to our situation. But I'm here speaking as the treasurer these past 3 years. I'd like to ask if you realize that the landmarking of our building against our wishes has the unintended consequence of imposing on our rights as an Evanston Church congregation. We built the building, we own it, we've maintained it for 75 years, and now preservation intends to tell us the standards of our maintenance on the building to the point where we may not be able to maintain it as previously done. One example is the multiple, very large windows framed in wood that we cannot open currently due to rotting. The wood and glass will fall apart. Preservation would not permit us to modify them in any way to become affordable replacement windows, which we sorely need to do now that our air conditioning from the 60s has died. So here we are this summer with windows that don't open and air conditioning that does not work because we're under preservation nomination brought forth by one member. Going on nearly 4 or 5 years now, we have been attempting to right-size our building to a smaller, low-maintenance setting for our small congregation by selling our 400-seat building. A vote to landmark it severely shrinks the pool of buyers, knowing that any maintenance or remodeling will cost more than usual due to having to meet preservation standards. This unintended consequence also shrinks the value of our building. Based on our finances and the size of our congregation, it is unrealistic to expect the building to be maintained as we have done in the past, as it's equally unrealistic to expect our mostly senior membership to continue giving their good money after a bad situation. As the treasurer, I am asking you to vote no to landmarking 2715 Hurd Street. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Wynn Graham and then Bonnie Wilson.
Oh, okay, the video will not start. The video is not starting. Well, I'll start my video. Okay, there we go. Good evening. My name is Wynn Graham and I live in Ward 6. I'm a member of Joining Forces to work on affordable housing issues with the Peace and Justice Committee of Lake Street Church. I'm asking you to eliminate the 3 unrelated rule and the definition of family, as these are a barrier for older adults to form households for social and economic benefits. For longtime Evanston residents who want to remain in town, sharing housing presents a way to cut costs and to form a supportive living environment. Isolation, as we've been reminded in the pandemic, is unhealthy for all ages. Social interaction is important to keep adults actively learning and engaged. Not all retirees in Evanston can afford the luxury of moving into a continuing care place. With limited income, often less mobility, and access to cars, a household can combine resources and meet the needs of all. The problem of students in neighborhood is perennial and bad behavior needs to be curbed. The growing number of older adults needing affordable housing is a challenge to our community that we need to address immediately. Eliminating the 3 unrelated rule will open options. I hope you will advocate for these changes.
Thank you. Who do we have next? Next, we have Bonnie Wilson.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Wilson. I live in the 1st ward, past the 3rd ward, and I've been a realtor for over 36 years in Evanston. The council members today received an email from Joe Roth, the legislative director of the North Shore Board of Realtors. As a member of this committee, I also agree with his definition of family and occupancy standard recommendations. I also want to point out two other issues. As I agree with Joe, Evanston no longer needs a definition of family in their zoning code, as it is outdated and inappropriate. Remove the definition of family in the code as it currently stands, and change family references to dwelling units and determine maximum occupancy of both rental and owner occupant dwelling units using the property maintenance code, which is calculated using a formula that takes into account the number and square footage of bedrooms and the square footage of general living space. And this is what the staff recommends. I also have a client who wants to buy a home with other women to share in the housing expenses. And this is not possible with the 3 unrelated zoning code. Also, this is not the time for a moratorium on ADUs in Evanston. COVID is still a problem. It has not gone away. We still have a very big need for affordable housing in Evanston. I'm going to give you an example of a family who wants to put an ADU in their house. I know that this is not the issue. This is not the moratorium, but this family is so confused that they're not going to do it. They were so looking forward to having an ADU in their house for their mother who they want to come live with them, but they can't do this. They feel if they start putting an ADU in your house, you're going to take it away, put a moratorium, and they're just very confused. So I think the issue is, the solution is, don't do anything with ADUs. As Dick Coe just said, and I'm also a member of his organization, he said, go on to other things. Go to 3 unrelated, but do not do anything with the ADUs. We've worked so hard to try to get them in Evanston. This family is very disappointed, as they were looking forward to having their mother come live with them, and now they're not going to do it. So, as I said, this is not the time to have families live apart. This is the time to bring families together. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else?
Tina Payton and Cecil McHugh.
Ms. Payton, are you there?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, Chair and council members. I would like to talk about P2 first, rent and mortgage assistance. It states that there's no help for property tax unless it's in your mortgage. Most likely, if someone has not paid their mortgage and it is separate from their property tax, they have not paid their property tax. There needs to be some help for people that need help with property tax, especially landlords that are not getting paid at this time. P3, this is $50,000 for small businesses. Once again, I am advocating for small Black landlords not getting assistance from the city, no money, anytime. We are businesses also. We have been harmed the most with the eviction moratorium. Tenants are not paying rent. It's hard to get new tenants because of the moratorium, and people could just move into our place and sit there and pay no rent. We also need repairs to keep in compliance with the code violations and update affordable units. So we, small Black landlords, should be considered for the $50,000 grants, because we have been harmed very greatly, as many other small businesses here in Evanston. Also, I would like to talk about P6. We do not need a rental license. We already have rental registration. We already have occupancy rules. We already have nuisance ordinance. no more unrelated people. It should still continue to be 3 unrelated. This is just a pass for the houses that have been bought by large developers, cutting them up in the northwestern area into 8 or 10 bedrooms, and they're renting them out for $7,000 to $10,000 a month. You know that it's not a family. So when you take the word family out, then you're giving a pass to landlords for over occupancy. There's many rules on the book. I went to many of the nuisance ordinance from former Alderman Rainey and former Alderman Wilson, had the nuisance ordinance committee for over a year. That was passed by the council and it should be enforced.
Ms.
Many
Wilson?
of these rules need to be enforced, not changed.
Ms. Payton, I need you to wrap up.
Yes. So we need to, as Councilmember Kelly stated, we need a committee and no action should be taken on these regulations today. Black Lives Matter all the time, not sometimes. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McHugh, are you here? Are you there?
Yes. I'm Cecile McHugh, and I'm speaking regarding 2 issues on the agenda: occupancy of dwelling units and the moratorium on non-owner occupied ADUs. I researched regulations regarding ADUs for communities with large, college student populations, and I found with very few exceptions that the overall trend is for college towns to require that an owner occupy either the primary or accessory dwelling. Communities that require ADUs to be on owner occupied lots include Bloomington, Indiana, Madison, Wisconsin, Iowa City, Penn State's community, Minneapolis, Boston, Miami, Dallas, and Philadelphia. Chicago has a pilot program for ADUs currently, limiting ADUs to 5 areas and will require owner occupancy in 3 of these 5 areas. Bloomington, Indiana, which already required ADUs to be on owner occupied lots, passed amendments to their ADU ordinance, limiting ADUs in very significant ways not limited before, after encountering unintended consequences. Perhaps the city of Evanston should talk to the city of Bloomington, Indiana, and to the city of Chicago regarding their thoughts and findings. I also researched occupancy limits for unrelated persons in college towns, and I found a report from College Town Life, referenced online in numerous places. This report states that college towns most often need to enact some form of occupancy limit ordinance for either of 2 reasons. 1, safety. 2, maintaining affordable housing for all residents, given that no or few limits on the number of unrelated occupants can raise home prices in college towns out of the reach of families and singles or couples, because homes in college towns often sell for 10 times the yearly rental income. Very close to half of the over 100 college towns in this report limit occupancy to 3 or 2 unrelated persons. A large group of the rest of the towns limited occupancy to 4 unrelated persons. Approximately only 10% of the college towns in this report have occupancy limits I am grouping as somewhat comparable to the proposed changes to the Evanston occupancy limits. In this roughly comparable group, I'm including those which allow 2 people per bedroom.
Ms. McHugh, could you wrap up?
Yes, I'm sorry, it was 2 issues I was speaking on, and I have just several more small paragraphs, okay? In this roughly comparable group, I'm including those which allow 2 people per bedroom or base occupancy on square footage only, or allow 8 or more unrelated people. Data such as this shows that basing occupancy on square footage bedrooms versus having a limit on the number of unrelated persons who can live in a unit is not a best practice for college towns. I lived with 6 other family members in a 3-bedroom apartment until I was in high school. The size of the bedrooms and common space we had is extremely close to Evanston's minimum number of bedrooms and square footage for our family size.
Ms. McHugh,
One
I
more
have to,
paragraph.
Ms. McHugh, I have to be fair to everyone. I need you to wrap up.
Yes, it is just that we didn't have enough living space. So I can tell you from firsthand experience that occupancy based upon bedrooms and square footage proposed is, while it's workable for families that of a certain size would have to make do, is not adequate for the same number of adults, especially
Thank you.
unrelated
Ms.
adults.
McHugh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Next up, Ann Ratchizik, Carla Sutton, Sue Lolbach, and Rob Beisenbach, and then that's it for public comment.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to keep repeating everything. I'm the chairman of the board of the Second Church of Christ Scientists in Evanston. My name's Ann Rataichek. I and my husband are lifelong residents of Evanston, and we're graduates of Evanston High School. I have been attending the Second Church of Christ Scientists unheard for 70 years. I was quite dismayed that one person could nominate a building and force its landmarking against the wishes of the property owner. I don't believe the neighborhood wants this, as in the past when we were under contract to sell the church to the Salvation Army Church. The neighbors stated that they felt the best use of the property was single-family dwellings and didn't want a large congregation coming back into the building. As the building was built to hold 400 people, it is really only suited for a large congregation, one that could financially be capable of keeping up with maintenance of a 75-year-old building. Our membership is quite small. I have loved my church, but it is not special. The suggested adaptive uses by the Historical Commission for the building would not be approved by the city, as anything going to the building, even a church, would require special approval because of zoning in an R1. And the interior space is not adaptable for anything other than use as an auditorium. Since everybody else has probably said, I'm going to cut it short there. Please vote against landmarking this church. Thank you.
Thank you. Next. Next is Carla Sutton.
Good evening. I'm very concerned also about the landmarking of the Second Christ Church. Since that church occupies land that was once considered Bower Place, we would appreciate it that we don't think it qualifies for landmark status. You eliminated a black neighborhood at that same site without giving any consideration to the current residents at that time of what the choice they had to remain in North Evanston. Secondly, on the Plan and Develop Commission, I wish that some of your concerns and some of your plans would be of assistance to small landlords who have a business. Why are community block grants always given to restaurants? We run businesses too. We have to hire electricians, we have to hire plumbers, we have to hire lawn keepers, but yet we can't get rid of deadbeat tenants who have been on my property now going on for 2 years, refusing to pay rent. And there's no support for people who are living on a pension and trying to maintain income property. I wish you would reconsider your decisions about giving some kind of relief to minority small landowners. And I agree completely with Mrs. Payton on opposition to P1, P2, P3, and P6. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Sue Lolbach.
Sue, you're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm Sue Lolbach. I work at Connections for the Homeless and lead a group called Joining Forces for Affordable Housing. I'm going to read a very short statement from one of our Joining Forces members. This is Hip Circle Empowerment Center. Hip Circle has been working to honor the inherent power and worth of all women and has been active in the Evanston community since 2010. We strongly believe that for women to accomplish their goals, we must have choices, and these choices must be respected. This includes the way we define family and where and how we choose to live. As the decision concerning the definition of family and the 3 unrelated rule comes before you, we ask that you strike this outdated and arbitrary rule from our zoning code and permit us, however we choose to define family, to be able to afford living in Evanston by safely sharing housing, as people have done for millennia. In addition, I'd like to state, and this is on behalf of Joining Forces, we are currently in the midst of a housing crisis that is expected to get worse as people who have lost income during the pandemic continue to struggle and small landlords continue to struggle. The recovery from the pandemic is not expected to be seen for at least 2 more years in terms of housing. So given this crisis, Joining Forces feels that the city should be proactively making it easier for people to share housing and to use their properties in as flexible a way as possible to allow people to live affordably. We hope that tonight the Planning and Development Committee will make a strong recommendation to City Council to expand flexibility by, number 1, removing the definition of family from the zoning code and allowing safe numbers of people, related or not, to share housing. And number 2, recommend against a moratorium on internal or attached ADUs and nixing any move to require owner occupancy. Measures to restrict who can live with whom and requiring owners to live on site are ineffective at controlling neighborhood change as well as student behavior. The city staff have proposed measures that will be more effective if well implemented. Please vote for flexibility and affordability tonight instead of for provincial restrictions that decrease people's options and drive up costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Who's next?
Rob Biesenbach.
Thank you. I'm a First Ward resident on Orrington Avenue. And, all right, stop my video, sorry. I'm a First Ward resident on Orrington Avenue, and I support the proposed moratorium on internal and attached non-owner occupied ADUs. The residents who live in the shadow of the university have been having a very difficult time with the growing number of homes run by absentee landlords and occupied by large numbers of students, which have been creating a major nuisance and a lot of disruption to the families living here. And we believe that this measure is one moderate and reasonable step that, together with additional zoning ordinances, stepped up enforcement and increased penalties on absentee landlords, will help resolve this problem and preserve this neighborhood well into the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last speaker, wait, the last speaker is Mike Vasilko. Mr. Vasilko, are you there?
I'm still here. I was going to be brief, simply, taking it on face value, looking at the building. This is regarding P7 and speaking in support of landmark status, which, if you look just at the building and its history, that's what I would do. And then my friend Carla Sutton chimed in about, and I knew there were some areas of the Sixth Ward that had been sadly impacted by decisions made years ago, decades ago, to move people out of the Sixth Ward to the Fifth Ward, not voluntarily. So now I'm curious to his comment, and this ties into reparations. I mean, for me, the most direct form of reparations is to, there are records, who lived where and when and how were they moved and how, and were they ever compensated if they actually did voluntarily do that? So if there's a history on this site, that should be investigated, is my point. Kind of flying by the seat of my pants here now because I didn't have time to research this at all. But if Carlos is accurate and knows that area, then the council has an obligation to take this in a different direction, I think. The building as it stands, as a building, architecturally, I'm an architect. I feel it should be landmark status, but more strongly now I feel it should be investigated as to who lived there and when and how they were vacated. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our public comment. Next, I want to move on with the agenda. I am going to change the lineup of the agenda tonight and move P1, P2, and P3 back to a later in our discussion and start with P4, which is Ordinance 82-021, amending Title VI of the City Code concerning live-work units. Would someone like to make a motion to introduce that item?
I'll move item P4, ordinance 82-0-21, amending Title VI of the City Code concerning live-work units. This is for introduction.
All right. Thank you. Is there any discussion from the council? Seeing none, Ms. Nyden, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
All right. Item P4 passes. So now, item P5, would someone like to make a motion with respect to this? Ordinance 75-021.
I'll move that ordinance 75-021, creating a provisional moratorium on the permitting and construction of new internal and attached non-owner occupied accessory dwelling units in the city. I move that ordinance.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? You know what, I wonder, are my lights on? Just 1 second, folks. All right, Councilmember Kelly, thank you.
I just want to say, this is really addressing a very small, tiny sliver of the ADUs. And this is really just very temporary. I know the word moratorium sounds kind of harsh. It's just a pause while the subcommittee of P&D really examines the ramifications and whether or not owner occupancy is something that we're looking to or not. But again, this isn't, it's just a pause so that we can examine this more fully to understand the impacts, those impacts that were mentioned by Ms. McHugh and others this evening. So, and we'll look forward to, the subcommittee of the P&D, and I don't know if we need to formalize that this evening, but, we'll look forward to meeting with DICCO and others to partake in the decisions and in a comprehensive approach towards, rental units and as well as ADUs.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed?
I generally am not in support of the moratorium. Can I just have staff, just for the record, how long will this moratorium be in place?
This is proposed to be 6 months.
6 months. Okay, thank you.
Is that, okay. Councilmember Ravel?
Well, I'd like to second Councilmember Kelly's comments. I mean, this is really not about the issue itself of owner-occupied or non-owner-occupied ADUs. It's really just giving us 6 months to be able to look at a whole host of rental issues. And I think our idea is that the subcommittee itself would work for 6 months, and so would the timing of the subcommittee's work and the moratorium would be coterminous, and we would look to report to Planning and Development in January. So that would be the end of a 6-month moratorium, and we would hope to have addressed a number of rental issues.
Okay. Councilmember Newsma?
I'll endorse Councilmember Kelly and Councilmember Ravel's comments. A long-term ban on owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied accessory dwelling units is probably not in our best interest, but a temporary moratorium to take a pause and take a more holistic approach to this problem, I think is the right step at this point.
Any others? So it's been moved and seconded to create the moratorium, but before we vote on that, I'd like to just check in with Councilmember Kelly about the concept that you discussed at the last P&D meeting of creating a subcommittee of P&D and you just were discussing it, to put this issue along with several others into it for discussion over the next 6 months.
Yes, I think is a really important component. We've been wrestling with many issues, and as Ms. Payton pointed out, even the licensing has its ramifications and negative impacts for some of our local landlords. So we want to look at all those together, and so it's really important that as a group that we convene, members of our council members from P&D, along with experts in the field of affordable housing, the ADU like DICO, and other experts. So I think this is really key, that we're not just piecemealing our approach towards rentals, but rather looking at it holistically through a subcommittee of P&D. So I hope tonight we can formalize that.
Yes. All right. Ms. Neiden, would you call the roll on P5?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Nguyen?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton?
No.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
No.
All right. By a vote of 5-2, the motion carries. All right. Next is P6. Would someone like to introduce P6?
I move item P6, ordinance 83-021, amending Title 6 of the City Code concerning occupancy of dwelling units and definition of family.
Is there a second? For P6?
Second.
All right. Open for discussion? Councilmember Reed?
I think it's really important that we amend our ordinance that limits, that creates a definition of family. Not too long ago, and maybe in the near future, given my income now as a council member, not too long ago, I had was living in the 5th Ward and had a 4-bedroom apartment and 3 roommates. And having a 4th roommate would have made that unit a heck of a lot more affordable for all of us. And I can see a situation in the near future where I may need or want roommates again. And if I have a few roommates and, like we have 2 roommates and one of us gets a partner and the partner wants to move in, it would be illegal. And I really don't think that as a city we should be defining family. I think it's an issue that we should leave up to folks in our community. What we do want to ensure is that we have safe places for folks to live that aren't, and we're not allowing hazards in our community. And the definition of family does not help us lessen hazard in our community, but what does help us do that is codes that we already have on the books. So, such as, I have a 1-bedroom apartment now. By code already, there are a certain number of people that can live within my apartment based on the square footage. Those are the things that we can easily enforce, far more easily than, determining whether or not someone is related or unrelated. And so I hope we can move forward and get this, in the definition of family so we can create more affordability in our city, and we can strengthen the laws that we have on the books to ensure that hazards are avoided.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly.
So yes, Councilmember Reed, I think everybody here would agree that, our definition of family is obsolete and we need to revisit that. However, I think we have to be very careful that we are not simply that we react thoughtfully and not just politically. There are a lot of ramifications and impacts that I think we don't see when we completely eliminate any definition of family and a cap. And if I could just read from a fair housing and group home expert and author of Model Zoning for ABA and American Planning Association, expert witness for the Department of Justice, Daniel Lober, as he says, the instant the city deletes its definition of family or removes its cap on the number of unrelated persons that constitute a family, that moment is the moment that it cannot regulate community residences for people with disabilities. Okay, so this could be harmful down the road for residents. It will instantly become a violation of the nation's Fair Housing Act for the city to require a license, impose a spacing distance between community residences, establish a maximum number of occupants, or regulate them through zoning. Transitional community residences where people stay for just a few weeks would have to be allowed everywhere in the city as permitted uses with no zoning restrictions. The result will be clustering and concentrations, especially in neighborhoods with lower cost housing. These clustering and concentrations will undermine the ability of the community residences to achieve their core goals of normalization and community integration, using non-disabled neighbors as role models, since the occupants of the group homes will interact with the occupants of very close by group homes. It's a lose-lose proposition for everybody, he said. So I would say rather than, and I'd further like to say, rather than debate this at length, I think this should be referred to the P&D subcommittee.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed. And then Councilmember Revelle. Councilmember Revelle,
Well, just in terms of procedure, would it, I think, maybe be appropriate for us to table this item to January with the idea that it will be one of the issues that will be addressed by the subcommittee? Is that the way to do this?
Procedurally, that would make sense.
Okay, then
to table it.
Okay.
I think that would be possible. Am I correct? Okay. Yes, council, if they can table this until a date certain in January, correct? Is your mic on?
See. Michelle Ozuribo. Oh, there we go. Deputy City Attorney Michelle Ozuribo, I say yes.
Thank you.
I'll hold off making that motion, though, in case, because Councilmember Reed has something more to say.
Yes. All right, thank you. Councilmember Reed?
Yeah, I just heard group homes mentioned, and, again, if we want to regulate group homes, we can regulate group homes with other ordinances. Again, the definition of family is not intended and should not be how we regulate group homes. We can have a licensing process. We can have all kinds of other ways to regulate that. And it also feels a little... I just don't think that's the way that we should be regulating this, group homes or anything. So I would hope that we do not table this until January. This is an issue of affordability that many folks on this council, I'm sure have folks maybe within your network or circle that this could impact. I'm hoping that we all do. I can say, this could directly impact my ability to afford to live in Evanston. We should not be defining, we should not be defining family. We have codes on the books that protect us against hazard, and the definition of family is not one of them. And I hope that we can end this sooner than later to live up to our goals of creating an affordable, livable, and inclusive city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kelly?
So, Councilmember Reed, I'm afraid that you might be mistaken in our ability to regulate, and then in fact we would be discriminating, and we could not once we lifted a cap and a definition of family. And I would ask you to participate on this committee. If you feel very strongly for it, it would be wonderful to have your participation and your own history to help us formulate the best codes and ordinance and comprehensive approach going forward.
Councilmember Newsma?
I'm going to endorse the committee concept, and I appreciate what Councilmember Kelly has said about reacting thoughtfully and not politically, and to paraphrase, taking a holistic approach rather than a piecemeal approach. So I think that makes sense here.
Okay. Councilmember Ravel?
So I move that we table this item to the second second P&D meeting in January, and ask the P&D subcommittee to look into examine this issue carefully.
I'll second that.
Okay. Ms. Nyden, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Sufferton?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
No.
All right, by a vote of 6-1, the motion carries to table this item until the second P&D meeting of January. All right. So now moving on to item P7. Would someone like to move item P7?
Madam Chair, I move item P7, ordinance 61-021, designating Evanston Landmark status for the property located at 2715 Hurd Avenue. It's for introduction.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I would like, before we have discussion up here, we do have the applicant who is here, and hello, Mr. Neville, would you like to step up and just briefly make a short statement, and then do we have somebody from the church?
Thank you. So I've lived next to the church for the past 11 years, and I've really found it to be a beautiful, even majestic building. It has clean lines. It has an 85-foot steeple. It stands as the centerpiece of our neighborhood. So a short time ago, when the church faced possible destruction from a proposed development, I just decided to see if there was any history to the building that might make demolition uncalled for. Now, it's really important to note that I didn't go into this with any preconception of what I would find or with any malice towards the church owners as they have suggested. I just really wanted to see if there was any history to the church. And with every turn of the page at the Evanston Library and History Center, I found more and more that told me, even as a layperson, that there were many things that were very special about this building. And when I approached architectural historians and preservationists, who then went out to look at the building for themselves, they agreed. And then, in fact, on 2 occasions in this process, the city's Preservation Commission voted unanimously in favor of landmark designation. And the second vote came when the church owner said that they had new evidence showing that Larry didn't design the church. The commission remained steadfast in its decision, unanimous. I am not an expert. I'm just a citizen who found out some facts about a building. I brought it to people's attention. The experts in our community who are charged with guiding this board and protecting the historical architecture in Evanston spoke twice, and they said, save this important building. Now, it's been said that landmark status would preclude the property from single-family homes, and perhaps that's true. But in the packet, there's information that shows there are multiple other uses for this building. And in fact, I do believe that there's actually a church in Evanston right now that's going through development or planning for development that might be turned into condos. So there are other uses for this building. The idea that there's a burden to support the building is the idea that once it becomes a landmark, you can't sell it. Nothing precludes this building from being sold. In fact, the first Church of Christ Scientist was a landmark and sold. No burden. Landmark buildings can be maintained. To say that rotted window frames that the city would just say, no, you can't do that, is not my experience, even in the short couple of months listening to the Preservation Commission. If a landowner comes and says, we need to do something, the commission listens, they discuss, they debate, they dialogue with the landowner, and they come to a decision. It's a process, but the church would certainly have to do that. Why I waited, I don't know, he said 3 or 4 years to look this up. I really didn't know the church was even for sale until I saw a public hearing signed for the child care center that they wanted to build. But once I heard that it was going to be demolished, I said, oh, well, how can they demolish this church, and what's the story behind this church? So I went out and I found it, and then I handed it over to the experts, and they said, yeah, this is an important structure. So, and the church has mentioned numerous times that it's just Mr. Nebel who's got weaponizing the landmark status. And I don't even know what to say about that. So today, but you know, it ends nicely, because today I'm going to hand you the petition that I went out, and I've got 50 neighbors that have signed this petition in support of landmark status. And most of the people who signed this petition are from the neighborhood. There are some people from other parts of Evanston that have also signed, but most of these people are neighbors. And one of the things on this list for me was important, was that the property does hold an important symbol of race relations on it. And I realize that landmarking doesn't necessarily impact the land, but the building. But in the previous discussion with the child care center, that gigantic building in its place would have obliterated the issues that Carlos was talking about. So people actually signed the petition for landmarking in hopes of actually protecting that part of the land. And I'd like to present that to you for the record today. And thank you very much for your consideration.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thank you. Next, we have Bernard Citron. Are you on the call?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Ms. Chairman. And I don't know why my video not start.
Take your time.
It says that I can speak without the video, but
Here you go. You've got it now.
Thank you, Ms. Chairman, members of the committee. Bernard Citron, the law firm of Thompson Coburn. You've already heard from a number of the congregation who are the ones who are very much directly affected by the decision that will ultimately come out of both this committee and possibly the city council. So I'll try to keep my comments brief. First, as has been pointed out a number of times, it is a very rare, to our knowledge, occurrence where this city would bestow landmark designation on a property without the approval of the property owner. Because as much as we hold dear our buildings, and I have been involved in any number in my career of adoptive reuses of buildings and preservations of buildings, and in fact submitting of buildings for landmark status, it does impose on the property owner. Now, Mr. Neville sort of poo-pooed that and made that a small point, but hundreds of thousands of dollars later, it is not a small point. The windows would not be allowed to be repaired in an economical way. And as we sit here today, despite the air conditioning system needing over $200,000 possibly of repair, you can't open the windows in the building. And in every occurrence dealing with this city's Historic Preservation Commission, windows are one of the major points. You're not allowed to change the windows. Now, is that in and of itself the reason not to bestow landmark status? No, it's one of a number of reasons. Starting again with the fact that this would be one of the few occasions, and we don't know the number, staff does, of landmarking a building over the objections of a property owner. You've heard, you saw in my letter that was sent to the committee, and then you heard today, there is extreme need for items on this building to be redone that will only be negatively affected by landmark status for the reasons that I said. Let's go a step further. You can decide the importance of this as you will, as to the fact that it's only today that this petition supporting the status is being presented to the city and to this commission. This matter has been wending its way through the appropriate process for months. I believe it started in May. And at no other time, not one other time, was there one other person from the neighborhood other than Mr. Neville's there. And I'm afraid I'm going to point a finger and say, because we challenged that over and over again, that the care that this neighborhood really didn't have the care for this church. It was only at the very last moment when Mr. Neville's had heard this any number of times that he finally went out and asked people to sign a petition that, by the way, it doesn't hurt anybody to sign a petition. I think this commission or this council knows that it's kind of easy to get a petition to be signed. In fact, you've probably seen cases where people sign on opposite sides of a petition. But up until today, the only person who made any statement at a hearing who supported this was one neighbor, who, by the way, did wait too long. He knew this property was for sale because he was at the hearing at the DAPR committee that we mentioned, very importantly, that if this church was so important to the architectural history of the city of Evanston, why did your very own staff, i.e. the experts, not object to the demolition of the building? Now, that particular project did not go ahead. It prevented us, the neighbor's reaction prevented that project, that sale, from happening. But from this standpoint, from where we sit today, your own staff, your experts, in fact, the person who drafted the final report, never mentioned at DAPR that, wait a minute, this project, that particular project, may have an issue because it requires the demolition of an important building. And despite what other people have said, it would have been appropriate, should have been appropriate, that if this building should have been reviewed, it would have come up at that time. But it did not. It also never came up during the time that was mentioned by another member of the community of when the city put together a list of potential landmarks and potential important buildings and potential important churches. We weren't on the list. Again, experts looked at this building in the past. And it wasn't until, I believe, May of this year, maybe April, that someone, one individual, decided that maybe there was an importance to this building. It never was looked at by anybody. Now, again, it's not a bad building, but as one of our own congregants said, it's an okay building. It has served its purpose, which is, again, one of the concerns that we have. It has served its purpose. It is a 400-seat auditorium. It's not even set up as a church, which was no one mentioned in the staff report. It may look and resemble a church from the outside, but if you go on the inside, it does not follow what most people would understand to be the archetype of a church. So some of those statements that were made in the staff report really don't carry through. But the use of this building would have to be by a large congregation or someone who would need a large auditorium. And we've already seen what this community did when it was presented with that idea. It drew many, many people many people objecting to this. And as mentioned, the statement was made, it would be better to have single-family homes as opposed to a large congregation on this property.
Mr.
So that
Citrin, can I ask you to wrap up, please?
Yes, I will do so. The idea that there are alternate uses for this building other than a large auditorium are just false. As we pointed out in our letter to the commission, some of the uses, by the way, included tearing down the building, because one of them that your own staff put out there was as a cemetery. So we don't understand, we don't see any real alternatives to this building other than a large congregation. It can't be a single-family home in and of itself. It's way too large. It can't be condominiums because the underlying zoning doesn't allow for it.
Mr. Citrin?
I will end right now. With that, we thank you for your time and consideration. We very strongly oppose the landmark designation of this property. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sufferton?
I appreciate it. So obviously this is in my ward, and I would like us to come to a solution that gets the church out because they want to leave, and like any property owner, that is their right. But I do need to take exception to the accusation that was just made that the neighbors were the one who chased away the Salvation Army. It was the Salvation Army who withdrew, and frankly, it was a result of their own sloppy rollout of their plans for the building. That was not a matter of the neighbors chasing away a large congregation. It's been said to me many times by many of the neighbors they would be fine with a large congregation. Now, we do know that circumstances are there are not a lot of large congregations that are looking to relocate. But I do need to advocate for the people in that neighborhood and say that it was not a result of neighborhood malfeasance or opposition that caused the Salvation Army to walk away. They are the ones who blew that proposal. And the Kensington School proposal was not appropriate on the basis of size and traffic concerns, and they walked away. I'd like to find a way for the church to sell their building. They have a right to do that. The Preservation Commission, who we charge with looking at these things, has said that the building is worthy of landmarking. I don't know, as a matter of policy, if that's the best thing for the city. I don't know if it's the best thing for the neighborhood. I certainly have heard and believe the members of the congregation that say it's not the best thing for them. But I will vote tonight to move this forward because I do think there's something that we need to talk about as a council, which is what is our role in the city as if we were going to create this landmark, what are we willing to do to ensure that it doesn't become an abandoned property? I think the concerns expressed by the members of the congregation are very real. The mention about the cost of repairs is very real. The mention about, whether that's consistent with their mission as a church, very real. But also the research that was done by the applicant supported a decision by the Preservation Commission. So here we are with this tough situation, but I do think that the neighbors have gotten a bum rap that they're reflexively opposed to anything when there have been two proposals that they were opposed to. Largely, there are some people who were okay with both of them, but they were opposed to them for legitimate reasons having to do with traffic or use or hours of operation. That said, I know that it's not going to be easy to find a 400-person congregation, and I think as a council we need to be mindful of putting this church in that situation. If this is landmark, there will likely be more difficulty finding a buyer. So that's all. Mr. Citrin, I know you're advocating on behalf of your client, and my role is to advocate on behalf of the residents that I serve. And I think that it was inaccurate to say that the neighborhood would reject any sort of congregation going in there, but I acknowledge that that is an unlikely outcome. So again, I'm going to vote yes to move this forward. I hope if it does get out, that this is a conversation we can have at council, because there are some large public policy implications here. There are other implications for the city, and since there are so many churches, and it seems like we are probably moving in a direction where large church buildings are going to be obsolete, this is probably something that will come up again. So with that, thank you for the time.
Thank you. Councilmember Newsma.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a couple questions for staff. First one is, the city of Evanston ever landmarked a building of any type over the objections of the building owner?
I've posed that question to staff and was reminded that the Foster School nomination for a landmark a few years ago was not met with, it was not a landmark brought forth by the owner. It was brought forth by residents and Dina Robinson and others. The building owner didn't necessarily come out and object in the same way we're seeing here, but they definitely were not enthusiastic about that landmark. And
thank you. The second question, has the city council ever overruled a recommendation of the Preservation Commission when the commission recommended preservation, but the city council overruled?
That has happened before. Most recently, it was the John August Nyden, no relation to me, home on Hinman, so about 4.5 years ago.
1700 block.
Yeah.
Okay. Just for the record, I do think that the preservation group has done a good job putting that packet together, and they scored some points with me. Before I read that packet, I was inclined to vote against preservation. They haven't convinced me that the arguments in favor of preservation outweigh the burden that would be placed on the congregation, who's unwilling and unable to bear the costs that a landmark designation would put on them. So I will be voting no on this one.
Thank you. Councilmember Reed?
Yeah. I will echo what Councilmember Newsmith said. I also will be voting no on this. I think we sometimes overuse the historic landmark designation, and I think in some cases, and I'm not casting this on to the folks who brought forward this particular proposal, but I do think that sometimes historic preservation is the fanciest NIMBY way to be NIMBY, and to say not in my backyard by designating something as a historic building. I have seen this building; it looks swell, but I don't know if we need to mark it as a historic landmark or for historic preservation. I can see this not only impacting, great that the church wants to sell, and I don't want to burden them necessarily, but my main concern is that the community as a whole, as Councilmember Suffredin mentioned, we don't want to see this building become vacant. I would personally love to see it used in another manner that is more financially productive for the city. So I'd love to see this building sold and either the building used in another way or the land used another way. I'm greatly supportive of adaptive reuse, so I'd really love to see the building remain in some fashion and be reused. But I'm going to be voting no on this as well.
Councilmember Revelle.
I just would like to, I really like the way Councilmember Newsma worded it, which was, I really appreciate the input from the Preservation Commission. I am definitely not an expert on that. And, obviously very thoughtful analysis of the building, and I'm hugely appreciative of Larry Perkins and all his great work. But I don't feel that the landmark designation details outweigh the economic hardship that it would impose on the church. And I just think the expense for them to continue to maintain the church on the hopes that some buyer will come along who can afford to do some kind of adaptive reuse of the building, I think is really expecting too much for the church. So I will be voting no. I didn't have my thing on, but I did. Oh, good.
Right, thank you. Well, seeing no more lights, I will also share my opinion, and I am a big supporter of our preservation ordinance and the work of the Preservation Commission. I think actually it has enhanced Evanston and the value of Evanston. I don't live in a landmark house, but I do think in this instance, I read all of the materials, and unlike other instances when I've been on the council where the argument to landmark a building seemed very strong, this one seemed to me to be not as strong, and the arguments in opposition to it were striking. So I, too, don't think I can support the landmarking of this. And I think Alderman Sufferton raises a really critical point. We are the city of churches, and we are the city of churches of dwindling memberships. And we need to prepare ourselves for that, because we have so many churches that are struggling financially, and they are very expensive to maintain. Spoken as someone who is a member of a small church. Roofs are incredibly expensive. Everything is expensive. So I really do understand the burden that we would be placing on this congregation. And as they said, that the church is not their mission. Their mission is something else. So I will be voting no as well. Ms. Nyden, would you call the roll for introduction?
Councilmember Kelly?
No.
Councilmember Newsma?
No.
Councilmember Wynn?
No.
Councilmember Burns?
No.
Councilmember Sufferton?
Yes.
Councilmember Ravel?
No.
Councilmember Reed?
No.
By a vote of 6-1, the introduction fails, and so it will not move on to the City Council. Now we're going to return to items P1, P2, and P3. And the first item is approval to allocate $125,000 of ESG CV CARES Act funding for case management services and the homeless management information system to address the needs of homeless and unstably housed people impacted by the coronavirus. The funding source of this would be $76,000 of unallocated funds from the city's $966,314 ESG CV CARES Act grant, and the reallocation of $48,786 of ESG CV originally allocated for ESG CV administration. So I will move approval of what I just said. Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, and Councilmember Wynn, we have Sarah has a brief presentation, just a couple slides. There's 3 items. They all sound kind of the same. So Sarah is going to try to explain what each of these items is, even though you just moved the first one, just so you understand the difference to the 3 items.
Thank you very much. Go right ahead.
Thank you. This is HUD wonkiness. But we're making a number of changes that are based on what's been happening in the marketplace that are also, I think, significant and important that the committee members and council are aware of. So we're going to talk about ways to use our funds more effectively based on changing market conditions. We've had things like the constantly changing moratoria on evictions, and we've been hanging on to some homeless prevention money for ESG, expecting it to burn off. But at this point, we're going to just say, hey, we need to be able to be flexible as we are with our normal ESG allocation to use that for whatever presents first, because we also have to use up that money by about a year from now. The other thing that has really changed is the need for what types of rent assistance. There's always a need for rent assistance, but we've had changes in the new rent assistance, I should say, coming out initially from the Consolidated Annual Appropriations Act, which was approved in December of last year and was the second big source of funding after the CARES Act. The state and the county both got emergency rent assistance money, and they had far fewer restrictions on how to use that and how long you could give supports and things like that. So that kind of made our project or our program less effective short term. We have additional needs. Historically, we've helped fund the homeless management information system because it is the
Alliance to End Homelessness in Suburban Cook County, which is the lead agency for our continuum of care, manages that. And it's been the scale of cases and everybody being tracked during the pandemic has been astronomically changed. And the Alliance needs help continuing to fund that. And our very small businesses continue to have needs for operating capital. We are seeing this as an ongoing challenge. So let's look at P1 first, and that's the reallocating some money that was first we had a little bit that we had unallocated, $76,314. Hang on to it in case something comes up that we need, right? There's our July of next year deadline. We also want to reallocate almost $50,000 of the money we had put for administration of the grant. We were really efficient in administering our ESG grants, both our our ESG CV and our regular ESG, and working with connections. So we want to put that into direct services. So one of the things is we have 42 households that were rapidly rehoused out of the shelter and are still in being in housing units. And an important part of keeping them there and helping maintain their stability is case management. So that's why we are recommending taking $1,000 and putting it against that need. These residents really need robust case management through the next year. We also are recommending $25,000 going to the Alliance to End Homelessness for the HMIS system. HMIS usually we have funded out of the Affordable Housing Fund. And I make a big deal out of the non-federal match that is needed. That was waived right now. So this is an expeditious way to use those funds and preserve unrestricted funds for things that we can't use our CARES Act funding for. So that's P1. P2, expand the rent assistance program to also allow mortgage assistance. Boy, this has been a start-stop we waited until Cook County and State of Illinois had finished their rent assistance programs last summer, which really carried over into the fall, simply because we have to all try to honor the Stafford Act requirement that we don't have any two payments for the same thing. And one of the ways you do that is by sequencing your rent assistance, because you can pay the same person's rent assistance as long as it's not the same months, and many people have had more than one need to apply for that. But not a whole lot of our CDBG-CV got spent for that, although it was very effectively spent in the census tracts we targeted. When Cook County came out really fast with the Consolidated Appropriations Act money, and they could give people up to 15 months of assistance, and we could only do 6. And this continues to happen. There's also a growing need for mortgage assistance because the forbearance is burning off. So, those homeowners aren't off the hook for that mortgage payment. It was just delayed.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ms. Flax, but with respect to the issue that was raised by Mr. Sutton and Ms. Payden about tenants who are not paying their rent and cannot be evicted, is there some way that we can help people apply for this rent assistance? I mean, do we do that? And how can we reach out into the community to some of these small landlords who have tenants who haven't been paying but who would be eligible for these programs? How can we connect those two dots?
In some cases, the dots don't connect because the tenants aren't paying, but they cannot show financial impact from COVID-19, which is required to get COVID-19 funding. This is a difficulty that we've been talking about. One of the reasons we want to try to preserve as much of the state prevention money as we can for non-COVID uses is that is the only source right now that we have that is available in Evanston. That's state of Illinois money. It's not federal. It has nothing to do with COVID that can be used when somebody does not have financial impact. I've tried arguing that people have impact of COVID. We have some people who've made bad decisions. You know, it's a mental illness or some kind of decision-making challenges due to being isolated or something. Won't fly because in the act it has financial impact. And that also, well, let me just finish up on this and then we'll get to the
sorry to interrupt.
to the other grants. No, it actually is a real problem. There aren't nationwide an enormous number of people who are not paying due to COVID, but when you are a small landlord, the impact on you is huge. We got a new HUD interpretation of 6 months, which was, oh, wow, you can roll all the arrearages into that first month. Well, that's really a game changer of how much we can help people. And that could be very helpful in dealing with the mortgage assistance needed as well. So right now, there is limited, the new emergency rental assistance programs that are coming out from the Recovery Act.
Right.
The Rescue Act, excuse me, have not been launched. So there's kind of the state and the county don't have their programs open. Connections has this state of Illinois money available. We want to make sure that we use our money for whoever needs it for rental assistance now with this greater ability to give people more than that 6 months or if they need mortgage. So what we're asking right now is just that flexibility. So it's almost like how we handle ESG, you know. Is it rapid rehousing or is it prevention? Who presents first and who do we need to help? Okay, last thing is the small business grants. We thought a quick way to get some money out for businesses was to, use basically the same requirements as the city's program that had just ended. And so we used their same levels and requirements. And one of the things is, if you've gotten assistance before, you can qualify for only $2,500, not the $5,000. Everybody who applied had gotten some form of assistance, and everybody had greater needs than $2,500. Short-sightedness on our part, won't do that one again. We are working with Paul Zalmazak to look at longer-term and needs going forward, but short-term, especially because the small businesses that are qualified not on being low moderate income owners of a business, which is a direct low moderate income benefit, who are doing job creation because they have additional paperwork. They have to show who was hired and all kinds of stuff. So it starts getting into a lot of compliance for not a lot of money. So this is a simple way to at least try to respect that and being able to, in essence, double their amounts that they will get from $2,500 to $5,000.
Okay, thank you. I have two council members. Councilmember Reed, did you have your light on?
Yes, but it's been so long that I forgot.
Okay, then Councilmember Newsma.
Thank you, Ms. Flax. I just have a question about eligibility requirements for this small business grant. What type of businesses would be eligible or not eligible?
This particular one, we were looking for businesses that have an actual physical storefront.
Okay.
They have a business location in Evanston.
Is there a minority MWB ownership requirement?
No. We, of course, are happy to include that, but there isn't a requirement.
Okay. So any business with a retail storefront? Okay.
Who either the ownership has an income below 80% of the area median, which can qualify them for it, or they are going to be hiring positions that are for low or moderate income workers. That's
okay, so
a HUD
that's
requirement.
a pretty significant cabinet. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Nothing is easy with federal funding.
Okay, Councilmember Revelle.
Well, to follow up on Councilmember Wynn's question, so there is still some state money rental assistance money, and you don't have to show that COVID financial connection. So could connections for the homeless, could someone in Mr. Sutton's position, for example, contact connections to say, could you work with my tenants? Or is there a way to kind of connect the dots
We
that
are
way?
working on doing that.
Okay.
In some cases, we run into another thing that honestly is very, very difficult. Sometimes the tenants simply do not cooperate in any way, shape, or form, and that is incredibly hard to deal with. Now, a caveat about the state prevention funds is the maximum they give out is 6 months. But even so, if we can help people, we will. But if the tenant will not cooperate and provide information, we're stuck still. This is one of the problems. Everybody says to make rent assistance accessible and make the process easy with few requirements, except for X, Y, Z. And it is a nationwide problem. And actually, Illinois was recognized as one of the states that has been among the most effective in getting out rent assistance, which is kind of scary when you look at how slowly rent assistance is getting out and how close the eviction moratoria are to burning off, even though they've been pushed out to October 3rd is what the CDC's now is. So we are also working very closely with the Cook County CHLAD, as it's called, that's its acronym, which is the legal assistance, which also can help people who have mortgage problems, it's not just rent, and also have tax issues. And so there isn't money that goes along necessarily with it right now, but they're trying to at least help mediate and things like that. So we're trying to connect all those things. We will also be having a landlord webinar about how to deal with all this stuff, and a tenant webinar. And those are going to be the 16th and the 18th, I think. I will get information. We will be getting information out to everybody on that.
Thank you.
Because that was a second question I had, which was, we do keep reading stories about how the money is out there for rental assistance, and yet it's not getting to the people who need it. But so it sounds like we're doing a lot of different.
We are trying.
Right, yeah.
And we have done, actually, one of the things, keep in mind, Connections has been one of the connectors for both the state and the county. And in some cases, they literally were one of the places where people could come in and someone would help them face to face. So many of these things are being done online. It is an overwhelming challenge to seniors and people who don't have access to technology. It's like, upload this, upload that, do this. And, our agencies have been doing a phenomenal job.
Yeah, right. And the fact that Connections is able to has so many different programs that it can help people access.
Exactly.
It's like one-stop shopping.
Steer them to wherever. Right. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So I see no more lights. Thank you very
I'm
much, Ms. Flax. Oh,
did,
go ahead, Mr. Reed.
So, council member. So the requirements, one of the things that, I appreciate the question earlier, but one of the things that I was a bit confused on is that you said if the jobs are for who again?
When you do CDBG, the jobs have to be able to be filled or by low or moderate income people. Normally what HUD does.
Does that mean, if it's filled by someone, so it means that we're giving people money if they pay people low wages?
They at least have to pay living wage. We at least make sure that they pay the county minimum. We're making sure of that. It's not, 80% of area median is not, is what it has to be. It isn't as low. But, these are some of the requirements. What the way job creation works in the non-COVID world is the jobs have to be jobs that can be filled by somebody with no more than a high school education unless on the job training is provided. So, you can't create something that requires a PhD and then say, oh, I qualify for CDBG. One of the things that HUD has done, which is a waiver of the requirements, partly to make it easier for people to deal with some of the paperwork, is to say, if the person you are hiring has an income below 80% of the area median, we will count it as an eligible job. So there are some flexibilities that HUD has introduced that are making it somewhat easier. But realistically, these programs are not easy to comply with. So that's one of the challenges.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right, so I have moved, and it's been seconded, the item P1. I guess we should take these one at a time. So, Ms. Nyden, would you please call the roll for item P1?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
By a vote of 7-1, P1 is approved. All right, so I'll just go ahead and move P2, which is approval to expand the use of CDBG CV funding allocated for rent assistance to include mortgage assistance. Good. All right. Could you please call the roll, Ms. Knighton?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
All right, by a vote of 7-0, the motion passes. I think I misspoke for P1. It should be by a vote of 7-0. So item P3, the motion was approved. I'll move approval of up to $50,000 additional CDBG CV funding to expand the emergency entrepreneurship support grants for small businesses suffering continuing impact of COVID-19. Ms. Nyden, would you call the roll for P that?
Councilmember Kelly?
Aye.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Wynn?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Suffredin? Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
By a vote of 7-0, this item passes as well. With that, I believe we are adjourned, but I would like to say before we're adjourned, thank you to Ms. Flax for wading your way, trying to untangle and all of these federal regulations, state regulations, and actually getting this aid out to Evanstonians. It is really remarkable what you and your staff are doing. So thank you.
Wonderful staff working with me and also amazing partners.
Yes, thank you to the partners too. All right, P&D is adjourned and the council will start in